Welcome to the Crossing the Line podcast. I'm your host, Joelle Castex. Today, we're joined by Dr. Billie-Jo Grant, a nationally recognized expert in preventing school employee sexual misconduct and a board member of NC Sesame. She's advised federal and state agencies, led a major Department of Justice school safety study, and helped shape laws that better protect students. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We will let her tell her story. We're so glad to have her here. Billie-Jo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joelle.
So you've worked at the intersection of child safety, prevention, and accountability for a long time. And what is really shaping how you're approaching this work now as opposed to when you started?
When I started in this field, it was understanding what things are currently in place. So asking questions like, how often does this happen? What laws do we have or not have in place? What are the loopholes? So it was really understanding the scope of the issue. What do we know? What do we not know? And then now it's taking action and it's really trying to fill those gaps. And I have a solid understanding now of what laws do we have in place? What are the federal regulations? What are administrators supposed to be doing to prevent and respond to these issues? What are the standards that are out there? And now it's working to equip those administrators with how to help them understand what their requirements are and then to help them to implement it, because it's a lot. It's a big thing to tackle to prevent child abuse from happening in your organization and properly equip all your administrators with how to respond once you have notice of a concern. And so it's a big task for administrators to take on and helping them to do it effectively. So we provide a lot of the training and help them with not only the training part of it, but the implementation part of it. So we can make sure that they're doing a good job to prevent and respond to these issues when they come up.
Well, and it's also doing it in a way that doesn't form an adversarial relationship. To come in and saying, hey, I'm a friend of the administration because we all want to keep kids safe. So I have a question. I don't mean to date you and all this, but there's so much has happened in the past, 50 years when it comes to child protection. Now, so you have a PhD in educational research, statistics, and evaluation. And my guess is that most of your classmates were focused on things like student performance and teacher performance and stuff like that. Did you go in and say, hey, I really want to evaluate educator sexual misconduct? Or did you wait in order to do that?
Yeah, good question. I finished my master's in educational administration, social foundations of education, and was in the room with a lot of educational administrators. And I wanted to continue on that path. And I was either going to go to law school or I wanted to be able to collect data and inform change, essentially. And so the educational research statistics evaluation equipped me with how to do research, how to collect data, and how to effectively communicate that data, because that would allow me to collect data that legislators need to be able to move the needle on these topic areas. So that was one of the reasons for going into it. I completed both my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation on sexual misconduct in schools. So it allowed me to continue those research projects and do a further in-depth analysis of the topic as well.
Were you met with a lot of pushback while you were doing that?
Yes, it's a difficult topic to study. As you know, it's a sensitive topic. There are some administrators that are champions for change, that they are willing to talk about it and they're willing to do anything they can to move the needle on the topic area. And I have found those champions in the research that I've done that are willing to pick up the phone. They're willing to talk with you, to have those discussions and be open and honest about the challenges that they have and how things occurred. And then there are others that you will call, and I would say probably more of 90% of those that you might call that are really reluctant to talk about it. And that's one, it's uncomfortable. And two, there's a lot of legal requirements around this. And so they might be thinking, I need to call my lawyer, or I don't want this in the paper. I don't want our school district to look bad. And so there's a lot of reasons why they might not be willing to be open to talk about it because of the sensitive nature of the topic area.
So you brought up two different kinds of administrators, the kind that are doing it right and the kind that are trying to avoid the topic. What are administrators doing that is wrong, and what do you see as some of the major fixes that can happen to keep kids safer in schools?
I think a challenge for administrators is often they're not trained in their master's program with how to prevent this, and they're not given a course on what am I supposed to do to be compliant with the laws? What am I supposed to do to prevent this issue from occurring? And how do I do a thorough investigation when something does come up? That's not something they get in their master's programs or their PhD programs. And so they're learning it when they're either like on the job, or they're getting a training like the trainings that we offer from McGrath Training Solutions, teaching them how to do thorough investigations. But they're heading into these responsibilities not being equipped to do so. And so it's a challenge for them. And it's also a challenge that administrators juggle a lot, and they're juggling phone calls from parents and issues all day long. They're short staffed. They usually have many duties as assigned that they're juggling, and this is just one more duty as assigned. It's a very important duty, but it's still one in a very long list of duties that they're juggling. And oftentimes schools, while we have the policy will say you are required to conduct prompt, thorough investigations, we don't have a budget line item for that. So they're not given another administrator just to conduct investigations of concerns and complaints. It just gets thrown on the duties of the principal or an administrator. And so while the requirement is to do a prompt, thorough investigation, sometimes administrators aren't set up for success in that they are juggling a lot, and they either aren't aware of the requirements, they're not educated on the requirements, or it's very hard. They may be aware and they're just trying to get through their day. And so that's part of it. Another part is administrators. Um, in some of the cases that I'll handle, I will see administrators that will intentionally try to handle these cases quickly and kind of make them go away. And they handle them in the short run. They think, oh, maybe the parent told me that we don't want this to go to trial. Please don't call law enforcement. We don't want our child on the witness stand. Maybe the teacher said, I'll resign, I'll make this go away. Maybe their own district attorney told them, offer this person a resignation agreement, give them a letter of recommendation. They'll go away. You'll be happy. It won't be in the paper. You won't get calls. And it becomes this like short-term solution that they think they're doing the right thing in the short run, that by allowing this person to resign, they get rid of the problem. The kid can come to school. The parent's happy. The kid's happy. But it creates this long-term problem. But the secrecy of it creates that individual can go get hired somewhere else and hired again. They have no past. And then the district never really addresses it because they just kind of, well, let's not talk about it. And so they don't talk about it with their staff, and they don't put it out to their parents. This happened, and here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think from my work, the biggest thing an administrator can do to influence protection in their school is just to talk about it. Talk about it and say,
Yeah.
this may happen here, or this did happen here, and here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And not be afraid to just talk about it, because it will happen. It's going to happen everywhere, and it has happened everywhere. So let's talk about it and not pretend that it's not going to happen. It will happen wherever the kids are. It's going to happen. And so let's talk about it. And the administrators that can talk about it set the tone that we don't tolerate that here. And when they set that tone, then those people that are going to engage in those behaviors are going to leave, or they're not going to engage in those behaviors because they know it's not tolerated.
Yeah, that's very similar to a lot of the pushback when we try to do prevention education in the schools, and administrators are like, oh, we don't want that because we don't want reports to go up. Well, the abuse is already there. So having the reports go up only means that more kids are able to come forward because they feel safe. And so how are you seeing, so if these let's say a teacher's allowed to resign, and they draft some kind of legal paperwork, What happens when another school district calls and says, "Hey, we're thinking of hiring XYZ teacher." Do they do those background checks? I mean, how or what does the school or school district usually say in those cases?
So in a lot of the cases that I've seen, there'll be something called a confidentiality agreement that is signed between both parties. And so it's you agree to resign, we agree to scrub your personnel file, and we agree not to say anything if anybody calls to get information about what happened. We can verify that you were employed here, but we will not give them any information about any adverse action or any investigation or why there might have been concern. That's part of the agreement. And so there's literally a contract. You agree to go away, we agree not to say anything.
But doesn't that go against mandatory reporting laws?
Well, there's a few different laws. Mandatory reporting laws would be you're required to report to child welfare once you have knowledge of suspicion or reasonable cause to believe that a child's being abused. And that's because we want to remove a child from a situation where there may be abuse occurring. Um, Many of these cases is it's also a crime, and so it's
Yeah.
law enforcement or child welfare will hand it over to law enforcement for them to do a criminal investigation. And then schools have their separate own responsibility to do an administrative investigation. And that would be if there's a policy violation. And that could be an ethics violation, it could be a conduct violation, it can be a Title IX violation. So sexual abuse falls under Title IX because it's abuse of a student by a staff member, it's sexual harassment. So it falls under Title IX regulations. And they are required to do a prompt, thorough investigation to determine what happened and take appropriate corrective action and provide support to the student or students or make sure that there's a safe environment overall. So lots of competing responsibilities between the different agencies, and misconduct falls under all of them. So if an administrator has knowledge of abuse, they need to pick up the phone and call child welfare. And if it's a crime, loop in law enforcement, but they also have their own responsibility to see if that individual committed a policy violation and if there are other students affected. And that's a much bigger duty than just did a crime occur, which is what law enforcement's question is. Did a crime
Mhm.
occur beyond a reasonable doubt? Where school districts have to determine was there an unsafe environment? Are students affected? And how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And those are much bigger questions and responsibilities because they're not just serving one student, they're serving a whole school or a whole district of students. And the responsibility isn't just to correct it for the one student that's affected, which would be law enforcement's responsibility, that we're going to hold you accountable for a single incident or crime, but we have to make sure it's safe for everybody and everybody moving forward. And it's a much bigger duty.
Are you seeing that there are schools that are using the internal investigation as the solo investigation and not informing law enforcement and not doing a Title IX investigation? Or
Yeah, we see it both ways. So I'll see it where school districts will do an internal investigation and won't call law enforcement. And that's typically that they'll hand it to HR and handle it as a personnel issue. So instead of thinking of it as sexual harassment or abuse of a student falling under mandatory reporting or falling under Title IX, they handle it as just a personnel concern. And so we're going to have them resign. You violated our ethics policy. And so they put it in that lane and we'll handle it internally and not call mandatory reporting or law enforcement, which is really a teacher or an employee focused lens on it versus a student focused lens. Where, from a student perspective, if you have knowledge that a student's being abused, you need to pick up the phone, call child welfare, call law enforcement. On the opposite end, I do see schools that will call law enforcement, call child welfare, and either law enforcement won't have the enough evidence to press charges or to prosecute the case. And the school will stop their investigation, wait for law enforcement to complete their investigation. And if they come back and say there's no crime, then the school may say, well, if there's no crime, there's nothing we can do. But the the level of proof for criminal investigations is much higher. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And
Yeah.
versus school districts are looking for preponderance of an evidence.
The evidence shows that this more likely than not happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's different standards of evidence. Um, Law enforcement is looking to see if beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody's committed a crime, where school districts looking to see if it's just preponderance of the evidence, a feather more than 50% that somebody's committed a policy violation. And so a school district shouldn't look at what law enforcement did and say that we're done, that because they didn't find anything, we won't find a policy violation, because it's a completely different standard and also different evidence that can come in, rules of evidence and how you collect information. And again, a much bigger responsibility that if you're going to be employed around kids, we cannot employ individuals that have past histories of inappropriate behavior. Doesn't mean they have to have a criminal history, but if they have a history of inappropriate behavior, we need to take action to make sure that kids are safe.
It's very interesting because you touched on something that I've seen a lot, which is, oh, well, the cops said there was no crime, so the kid there's no substance to the allegations whatsoever. And the role of the policy investigation is important. So because like you said, nobody's really trained to do that policy investigation. So who's doing it in schools?
It will depend. If it falls under that personnel lens, oftentimes the HR director will complete that investigation. If it falls under sexual harassment, Title IX, oftentimes the Title IX coordinator will be the one to complete the investigation. Sometimes school districts will hire a third-party investigator to come in and complete a third-party investigation. And other times there may be a variety of administrators that are trained on how to complete thorough investigations. And as long as they don't have a conflict of interest with this individual, they're able to complete them internally.
Okay, because I can imagine an educator saying, I just really wanted to teach history.
Mm.
I didn't get into this to do sexual abuse or Title IX investigations. But on the Title IX subject, in my discussion with Terry Miller, the president of the board of NC Sesame, she brought up the vital importance of Title IX. And I think that, most listeners here say, we see that colleges have Title IX officers. We understand it's important, but I don't think people really understand the role that Title IX plays in stopping sexual abuse in K through 12 education. Can you, shed a light on that?
Sure. So Title IX was passed by Congress in 1972, and it essentially prohibits sex discrimination in schools. So every child has a right to go to school without being discriminated against. Later, the courts ruled that sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination. And so the Office for Civil Rights, through the Department of Education, releases guidance to schools about what they should be doing to both prevent and respond to sexual harassment once it occurs. And the guidance is very specific and actually calls out staff to student sexual harassment and misconduct and abuse as the definition of harassment. And all the way back to 1975, schools were required to have a policy, have grievance procedures in place, which would be how do you file a complaint or a concern, and the steps that will be taken to address it, have a coordinator or this responsible employee that they can go to report concerns and complaints. And they were required to disseminate that information to their staff and their students. And so that's been in place since 1975 for public school districts. The guidance continues to be released by OCR. Some pivotal documents are from beginning in 1997, where it calls out staff to student sexual harassment explicitly, again in 2001. And then there were new regulations that were released in 2020 under the Trump administration. And those regulations keep a lot of the same foundational principles of Title IX, still define sexual harassment, but slightly changes the definition. Instead of it being severe or pervasive behavior, it became and so it became a higher bar. So it had to be severe and pervasive for it to meet the definition of Title IX, which is what we're still operating under today. much of the abuse under misconduct is severe. Any person reasonably situated would find it severe, and it's pervasive. It's usually happening more than once. And so, most often, sexual misconduct is going to meet the Title IX definition, and then it's happening at a school related or educational related event that they met them because they were their teacher. They're either having access to them at school or after school or bringing them home or those types of things, but they have the opportunity to abuse them because of that relationship, that educational relationship from school. And so it creates that jurisdiction that Title IX falls under, that you have a right to go to school without being sexually harassed by a school employee.
So, does Title IX only apply to public schools or does it apply to private schools as well?
It's only public schools, so those that are receiving federal funds. And if a school is not in compliance with Title IX, if they don't have a policy, they don't have prevention efforts in place, training for staff and students, if they don't complete their own investigations, remedy the environment, or put in supportive measures for those that are affected, they can have those federal funds removed. So there are many things that schools should be doing, not just have a policy under Title IX, but have a policy, make sure individuals in your organization know about it, conduct prompt, thorough investigations, and there's very specific requirements for timeline and how you handle an investigation. It's a very stringent process. And then once they know about a hostile or an unsafe environment, they need to take steps to correct it. So there's a lot to Title IX. The coordinator is responsible for making sure they're in compliance with their policy, their record keeping, and then also being someone that they can call at any time. They have to have their email, their phone number posted. If you want to file a concern or a grievance, you can call anytime. So Title IX really provides a federal regulation. So this isn't just state law, it's a federal regulation that's in place that Congress initially passed in 1972. The regulations were released, developed originally by the Health, Education, and Welfare Office, which is now the Department of Education today. And that stipulates that everybody has a right to go to school free from not only sex discrimination, but the definition of sex discrimination includes sexual harassment, and that includes staff to student sexual abuse.
So, are you finding that, because one of the things that Terry said was, if parents are frustrated, file a Title IX complaint, because that's and so what I'm hearing from you is that the responsiveness there might be much more acute than that from an HR department.
Once a formal Title IX complaint is filed, and under the 2020 regs, which we're currently operating under, that if they receive a formal complaint, they have to do a prompt, thorough investigation per their policy. And so it forces a thorough investigation. And a thorough investigation would include interviews with all relevant parties. So both the complaining party, the responding party, any witnesses, would include document collection. They share evidence with both sides throughout the process. It includes writing an investigation report, all the key facts and evidence that's included, and then writing a decision maker report. So how do we know if there's a policy violation? And it gives both parties the opportunity to respond, add additional evidence. So it can be very difficult for individuals to go through this process because it does become a long process. Everybody's interviewed, the evidence is shared with both sides. And so sometimes it's not friendly to victims coming forward, but it does provide the opportunity to have an investigation done, make sure that light is shown on an issue, and that we're going to take appropriate corrective action. Because it's not just do the investigation, but it's also make a decision about, was there a policy violation and what steps you're going to do to remedy and correct the environment. So Title IX, if the investigations are completed per policy, per the regulation, then it will shine light on the issue and get it corrected.
So, And in a perfect world, that happens all the time. And unfortunately, we're not in a perfect world. Now, what is the data and your experience showing you that where are things falling through the cracks? Where are we seeing the problems with the system?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, that there can be limited funding for investigations. And so sometimes administrators and their all the things that they're juggling will do these investigations quickly, or they'll go and talk to the person accused, thinking, okay, I'll go ask this individual what's going on. They deny it, they take their word for it, and then they move on. And they never ask. Sometimes they interview the complaining party or the victim coming forward. Sometimes they don't. And many times that victim is also coerced, embarrassed, threatened to say anything. So if they now have two people that are denying something going on, they'll be like, oh, well, this individual's not even saying there's something going on. But kind of 101, investigation 101 for these cases is that, of course, they're both going to deny what's going on. The individual doesn't want to get in trouble. And they have groomed this individual to believe that they're either in love with them, or they have said, threatened them and said, if you say anything, I will harm you or your family. If you come forward and say anything, I'm going to commit suicide or I'm going to get in trouble. It's your fault or everybody's going to know. They have all these different tactics that they'll take to kind of keep the victim from saying anything. So the definition for the policy says a prompt, thorough investigation. And thorough would include talking to others, which would include talking to other students, talking to other staff members, and not just limiting your investigation to those to the single party or to the two parties, because often you're not going to get a truthful answer or you're not going to get the whole answer, and so you need to go look elsewhere. And that would include looking at email records, looking at if there's access to chat, or seeing an individual's phone or asking the parents to look at that phone, but gathering of other data and information to make sure that this an investigation should be serious, especially if there's a concern about a student being abused. This shouldn't just be like, oh, I checked the box and moved on. This is more than that. We need to make sure that if this individual continues to be around children, that we need to know they are not engaging in this behavior. And if they are, we need to remove them immediately. There is no, we can't just check the box with these situations. So I think that's a big loophole. Just having the bandwidth and the time to address it effectively. I think another one is the education that we talked about, that many administrators sometimes just aren't aware of their responsibility until a case comes up. And their lawyer says, oh, yeah, the policy says you're supposed to do this. And they kind of got thrown into this principal role, and they sometimes don't even know, what the requirement is. And then I think student training is a big missing chunk. Making sure that students are aware of what's okay, what's not okay, how do you report it, who do you go to. That's the thing that I frequently see missing. Even though their policy will say, shall provide age-appropriate student training to students on sexual harassment.
Oh.
We don't see that they provide that student training. And then I think the resignations are also another big loophole that, which again, their own attorneys will sometimes advise them, this is cheaper for you to do it this way, or, this won't be the front page of the paper. And from an administrator's perspective, if it goes to the kind of doing the right thing in the short run, which would be calling law enforcement, having it be in the paper, doing an investigation, having every parent in your community probably call you to see what's going on, every staff member calling you to see what's going on. So doing the right thing is really hard. Even though we have mandatory reporting laws and all these things in place, for an administrator, their reputation of their district, that this is going to be something now, every time somebody Googles my district name, we're going to be known as the district that had this person working here and this case happen here. And so they have this, like, a lot of weight on them to kind of keep it in-house, or let's just get rid of this. But in that process, it's not getting help to the victim. They're not getting the response, which can sometimes be more damaging than the actual abuse itself, that they're not getting the support from the administrators. And then they're allowed to go get hired somewhere else. And in a lot of cases I see they'll be at their third school. They got passed from school 1 to school 2 to school 3, and the same process happened. We'll just get rid of that person, send them on their way, and they're able to, not only abuse one child, but they kind of get even more egregious as the time goes on. They get more brazen in their activities too, and so the pattern continues, and it allows that pattern to continue. So by not following mandatory reporting, which is why we have those laws in place, because it's so important to protect kids from abuse, and not doing investigations, it enables these individuals to keep engaging in this behavior. And it also enables a whole community that, oh, well, that person didn't get held responsible. And it kind of gives them uh, others that are witnessing, oh, well, I knew what that person was doing and they didn't get in trouble. So it kind of gives them the ticket to do it as well. And it creates a culture of, without accountability, it creates a culture of abuse.
Well, we saw that with Rosemead High School. And talk about the power of an investigation. All Matt Drange needed to do was just scratch the surface. And it wasn't just one case. It wasn't just his journalism teacher. It was 40 years of abuse and cover up. And everyone had been so indoctrinated into thinking that it was okay that, teachers are having baby showers for students who are, or like former students who are pregnant by the teacher. And you can see that, if the rules aren't followed, it becomes very, very attractive to someone who might have proclivities. Be like, wow, this is a great place to work because I won't be investigated and no one is going to notice or care. And then it just becomes, a hotbed for abuse like Rosemead did. Um, so what is the data telling you these days? What are you seeing in the trends when it comes to the reporting and exposure of educator sexual misconduct in our schools?
Unfortunately, there's just as many headlines for teachers arrested. And one of the things that I help with at Sesame and as a researcher is tracking Google alerts for teachers arrested and have done so since January 1st of 2014. So here we are 11 years later, and there are approximately 500 to 750 cases a year of headlines of teachers arrested for sexual misconduct of a student in that database. And um, it hasn't gone down. It continues to remain steady. I think the way that grooming occurs has changed, that students now communicate via technology. And so much of the grooming happens over social media. It happens even in a Google chat forum or on a Google Doc or within some application that maybe there's a game and they're chatting on the side. But they need a chat mechanism because that's how kids communicate today. And so the technology provides a lot of access and the opportunity for abuse to occur. So they can text any student late at night. And unless a parent is diligent monitoring that technology, they can be in the room of a child at any time of day. And you don't even know that they're talking to them unless you're monitoring that device. On the flip side, it allows for accountability if it is discovered and a parent comes forward or the school notices a concern and reports it to law enforcement, they're able to get access to text messages or strings of data or work with Verizon or Facebook or different agencies to get access to that information. And that makes it a lot easier for them to prosecute because now we don't need a victim to testify. It's all on text message. And so I do see cases being prosecuted more, but I haven't seen cases go down. So,
So there are a lot of parents listening to this, and they're probably panicking a little bit right now and going through their kid's computer and seeing how many Google Docs they have that they're sharing with educators. What what can you or what advice or counsel do you wanna give parents to help put them at ease and empower them to protect their kids?
Yeah, I think it's important for parents to remember that not all educators are abusers. And this is a small subset of individuals that are committing this type of behavior. And educators are very important in our community and for the development of our children and our society. And but wherever kids are is where abusers will go. And that can be schools, can be churches, Boy Scouts, camps, big brothers, big sisters, wherever kids are, there's the opportunity that abuse might occur. And so the best thing you can do is talk to your kids. And it can be age appropriate. You don't have to scare them when they're 5 and talk graphically to them. But at 5, you can talk to them about no one takes you in a side room by yourself and shuts the door. If somebody tells you to keep a secret, that we don't keep secrets. Secrets aren't okay. We have surprises, but we don't keep secrets. That people don't touch you on your private parts. And then as your kids get older, talk to them. Talk to them about this could happen. And there are individuals that can engage in this behavior. And not only that it could happen to them, but it could happen to their colleagues and their friends at school, and their responsibility to speak up and say something. So the only way that we can, if the schools aren't equipping the students with this training, and as I've mentioned, there's a dearth of that. There's more and more schools doing it, but that is definitely an area of concern that parents need to make sure that they're informing their kids about how to recognize behaviors. Who do you go to? If you don't want to come to me, who are the other trusted adults you can go to and talk about it and name them off? But have those conversations, have conversations in the car. Don't just do it one time, do it multiple times because kids forget. Do it every 6 months and kind of find a different way to talk about it.
So I want to go back to grooming a bit because I think that it is misunderstood in a lot of ways. And when I spoke to Christy Rowe, the survivor from Rosemead, she talked about how grooming was very pernicious. So, how often does grooming happen in these cases? And outside of technology, what else do you see? What are behaviors that parents should look for, and other educators who want to identify grooming among their colleagues?
Um, Good question. Grooming happens in 100% of educator sexual abuse cases. It's very rare to see a case where there's all of a sudden a rape or a kid's pulled off. There's the steps to gain the trust and to gain the opportunity and the access to the child. And so, some of the most common things I will see for kind of gaining that trust would be having conversations about personal issues. So, kind of counseling, we're going to talk about what's going on at home. I'm going to share with you my divorce or something else that's going on, but kind of oversharing personal information, especially with older students. Younger students could be gift giving, could be like special treatment, or I'm going to take all the kids out to ice cream, or, kind of these special activities that I'm feeling special from the treatment that you're giving me. And it could range from buying a kid sneakers to giving them money to could be a very big range of things, depending on the kid and kind of where their needs are. I almost always see that opportunity being there has to be an opportunity for the abuse to occur, and that will include either time before school, at lunch, or after school. Come hang out in my classroom, and it allows that one on one opportunity to shut the door, have that private space. I sometimes will see being pulled out of class. So they during their prep period, they'll send a note to pull that kid out of another class. Maybe it's I don't know, their homeroom class or their PE class, so it's not that important if they miss it, and they'll send a note along, so it's legitimate that they're pulling them out, but there's really no reason for them to be in this teacher's class missing their actual class, and that allows them the opportunity for abuse to occur, and then rides home. A lot of stuff happens, rides home, opportunity for that abuse to occur in the car, either on the way to something, on the side of the road, or taking them somewhere where then that abuse can occur. But again, creates the opportunity for that abuse, that one-on-one time, because they can groom them in the open, but they can't abuse them in front of everyone else. And so they have to create the opportunity for you're the last kid here, especially for drama, for sports. You stay, you need some extra reps, or you stay, we're going to work on that song one more time. And it creates that opportunity for the abuse to occur. And definitely chatting, technology, as I mentioned, is almost always included in cases today.
So, what do you advise? And let's say, someone is a high school educator and they think they're seeing grooming behaviors because in many states grooming isn't quite criminalized. So what do you say to educators when they think that they're seeing grooming and they need to do something?
Um, if they're seeing behaviors that are grooming, hopefully the district has a policy that explains what's okay and not okay. And if there's a policy that's saying these things are inappropriate, like you shouldn't be texting a student or giving a student a ride home, sometimes there's a gray area. If a district doesn't have those policies, if they do, and it's very clear, that educator speak up and say something. And while it might not be abuse, it might not be pick up the phone and call child welfare, it's evidence of unethical, unprofessional, immoral behavior that needs to be corrected. And we want to catch things during the breadcrumb stage, during the stage that they're starting to develop that relationship and correct that behavior before it becomes abuse. And so that's the opportunity to catch that behavior. And it can be that that educator has no intention of committing abuse. It could be that they need some education that you shouldn't be engaging in those activities, and it's giving the appearance of impropriety, and you need to correct yourself. But it could also be that that was the intention, and let's stop it and correct it before it becomes something worse. And I'd say for educators, not only to protect the child, to protect your community and your school, but also to protect your profession. That if you have a bad apple in your profession, you don't want that individual in your profession if they're engaging in these activities. And your responsibility per your National Education Association ethics is to report individuals engaging in unprofessional and immoral behavior. So report it so that it can be addressed by administrators, because administrators can't be in every classroom. They can't be in every hallway, and they need you to be the eyes and ears and report things as you see them. And it doesn't hurt to report it. And that's what the process is for. That if there is nothing going on, that will come out in the investigation. But if you don't say anything and abuse happens, then now you have that guilt that I didn't say anything and I saw something. And in a lot of cases, teachers will reference, oh, I had a feeling, or I saw that that was odd, that was creepy. And they saw all these little warning signs, but they just were like, oh, that's just how that person is, or they're just really affectionate, or that's just the way they are. And kind of rationalizing the behavior away. So don't rationalize it. If it's alarming or it gives you that odd feeling, go with that gut feeling and report it so it can be addressed.
Well, and if something is odd or creepy, chances are it's a policy violation somewhere in the policy manual, one would hope.
Most likely.
So, uh, talk to me about, so we've talked a little bit about survivor-centered responses. What role do you think that survivors, especially those who reach out to NC Sesame, what role do they play when it comes to changing laws and keeping schools safer and all those things?
Survivors play a really important piece in giving voice to this issue. And without survivors speaking up, individuals think that it just happened to them and that they were unique. and I'm the only one that this happened to. And instead, as we see from the Google alerts, there's an individual being affected by this every day in the United States. And the Google alerts are just the tip of the iceberg for this issue, because those are the ones that are making the paper and being reported to law enforcement. We don't have data on all the cases that are handled internally. Survivors coming forward, not only is it helpful to tell your story, but in many of the cases that I see, once one person comes forward, sometimes it allows others to follow in their footsteps. And in many cases, those that have committed abuse of a student haven't done it just once. They've done it over many years to many students, and they all live in shame and embarrassment and guilt. And so, by one person coming forward and telling their story, it can equip two others, could equip 20 others, it could equip 50 others with that strength to come forward and, say, that happened to me too. So, one voice can really enable a whole group of survivors to come forward and get justice and to realize that you're not alone. The survivor pages on our website are the most visited pages of our website. Survivors and parents are able to read the stories of others and realize that they're not alone, and that amazingly, the tactics that individuals take to abuse a student are very similar. And there's kind of this playbook that's out there, and they take similar tactics to groom others. They take similar tactics to create the opportunity for abuse. And so, reading the survivor stories on our webpage, you see the patterns and learn the characteristics. And survivors coming forward to share their stories help us to understand the characteristics. How did this happen? What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And especially for legislation, legislators, one of the biggest questions they'll have when there's a bill that's being proposed is that, well, how often does this happen? Why do we care? What's the impact? And, part of my work is equipping them with the prevalence. How often is this happening? Because the Department of Education, unfortunately, does not track that data. But we also need the stories, which is the impact. How does it affect students and their families? How does it affect the community? And without those stories, a legislator doesn't understand the importance of passing laws. They don't understand the importance of allocating money for prevention for this issue. And so voices are very important for survivors to come forward, and NC Sesame provides that community for survivors to come forward. And then, if you like, to have additional avenues to provide information to others, to advocate for legislation that needs to be passed.
So, is there anything I haven't covered that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
I can talk about all kinds of things. um, yeah.
Let's do this. If a legislator or a parent or a school district or an educator wants to get in contact with you to learn more about your work and what they can do to keep kids in their schools safer from abuse, how would they find you?
They could find me on the NC Sesame website. They could find me through McGrath Training Solutions. They can find me through Cal Poly. I also teach at Cal Poly State University. So I have a few emails, but you can contact me through any of those. I'm happy to help with providing resources, having conversation about the issue, helping you understand the complexities of the topic, or to navigate whatever might be needed.
Thank you. And thank you so much for spending this time today. I think that a lot of people in a lot of different areas that serve as students are going to get a lot of help out of this and find out that there are avenues where they can get assistance, not only in stopping abuse that's happening, but preventing abuse and then making sure it doesn't happen even further in the future. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much, Joelle.
So I also want to thank our audience for joining us for this conversation with NC Sesame board member and expert, Dr. Billie-Jo Grant. And if you'd like to learn more about the work of NC Sesame or to contact Billie-Jo, you can visit our website at ncsesame.org. And you can follow this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And if this conversation was meaningful to you, please share it. Awareness is one of the strongest tools we have for prevention. A 5-star review on Apple helps us be seen and heard by more survivors, students, administrators, and parents. I'm your host, Joelle Castex, and thank you for listening.